Good afternoon to everyone who have joined us today for this very interesting session called the IMI ICIMOD Conversations. And this is the second edition of the same. I would just like to thank all our panelists who are here with us, who have made it in spite of their busy schedules, and would invite those who have joined us to listen to them very carefully because they are huge resource uh, for the mountain states. My name is P.D. Rai. I'm the current president of the Integrated Mountain Initiative, the IMI, and I'm very happy on behalf of both IMI as well as ICIMOD to thank each one of you for taking time and being with us today. The topic for discussion today is going to be built around reimagining the post-COVID-19 Himalayan future. And this is the second, as I said, this is the second edition. We already had the first one in the end of September. And that dealt with a lot of the issues related to migration or the reverse migration and how the mountain states were really coping with that and what was the way forward. And more of that would be spoken on by one of our panelists, Mr. Brij Rathore. But just to tell you about today's session, this session is on building partnerships and securing futures. This is also about collaboration. This is about how we can collaborate across the mountain states in order to be able to deal with the pandemic issues or the current issues related to the pandemic happening, and we reimagine, rethink, especially in the areas of collaboration and how we build business ecosystems as we go along. So, without further ado, Mr. Brij Rathore to come and speak. First, I would like to introduce him. He is a professional forester from the Indian Forest Service and has spent over 30 years of professional experience in the field of participatory forestry, regeneration of degraded lands, watershed management, and landscape approach to biodiversity conservation, rural development, and environmental education. He brings a rich experience of engaging multiple stakeholders, including policy science practitioners, constituencies for conservation and sustainable livelihood outcomes at the landscape level. Presently, Shri Brij Rathore is the Chief Policy Advisor of Natural Resource Management at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD. So, Brij Rathore ji, the time is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Rai. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, very much audible.
Okay, great. Very good afternoon to all the participants of this second mountain conversation, which has been organized by IMI and supported by ICIMOD. So what I'll do is I'll just walk you through this whole journey, and also will introduce you to the Himalaya Calling initiative. Yeah. Golan, can I try and do it from here? Okay, I think Golan has already put it out there. So as Dr. Rai was pointing out, this is the second in series this is a mountain conversation, and I'll just bring some reflection from the first one. The Himalaya Calling, in fact, the conversation already has started. And if you look at some of the key takeaway messages from the first conversation session, the idea basically behind the first one was to look at the resilient livelihoods in the context of the pandemic. And one of the key messages which comes out is, particularly in terms of the mountain agriculture, to recognize the heterogeneity of the mountain agriculture. There was a lot of emphasis on value chain approaches. And the idea was to really sensitize the entire chain of stakeholders which are out there, and then see that how this value chain actually operates. Look at the mountain uniqueness in terms of niche products, particularly the health food or the nutraceuticals. And the idea is to largely focus on the nutraceuticals when you look at the mountain agriculture. The perishables needs to be given a shorter value chain. That came out very strongly. And one of the panelists actually brought in a lot of takeaways on agri-tech, which could be a big game changer, particularly in terms of the crop advisories, app-based seed purchases. And I think one of our own colleague from ICIMOD talked about the chip which you include in the beehive, which really regulates the moisture. So I think there are those technological innovations which are happening in the Himalayan region, rather not only Indian Himalaya, but also Hindu Kush Himalayan region. And one big takeaway was the reskilling, which is required in terms of the digital skills, the skill set of the returning migrants, and also the larger focus on the mountain women, which needs to be reskilled. The idea which actually found a great deal of resonance was create entrepreneurial ecosystems to really build up the resilient livelihood value chains, and look at the policy environment which has to be pro entrepreneurship, and also there's a requirement of coaching and mentorship. So these are some of the key messages which will keep on resonating in what we discuss even today. Next, please. Yeah. So let me put up this question is, I think Dr. Rai talked about my engagement with science policy and practice constituencies. So I'm pointing out, when we look at now one big ticket item in terms of resilient livelihoods and the value chain, this is sustainable mountain tourism. And if you look at the three constituencies and the questions around who's asking what questions, then I think let us put up the practitioners first. And I'm sure Mridula is going to, one of the panelists, Mridula Tangrila, she is going to really build upon many of these aspects. But I think here are some of these questions which the practitioners constituency is going to ask, and these will include community, the entrepreneurs, civil society organizations, even the managers within the government agencies. So I think homestay is one of the key focus here. So now the questions around homestay would be the homestay designs, the architecture, so we do not really compromise on some of these key values which the mountains have. How do we really deal with the waste management? Are there good business models which can really make it workable? Then there are issues around hospitality services, including the menus and the traditional cuisines, which again are a very strong, the mountains are the strong forte of that. Whole lot of things the people, the entrepreneurs have, they struggle on the communication. How do they communicate what products they are actually trying to offer, and how do they really deal with the market promotions? Where are the maintenance services of what has been created? If a cluster of homestays are there, which are being maintained by either the individual or the communities. And there are other requirements like records and bookkeeping, and how now we want to use the digital platforms for many of these things which really we want to do. Leveraging finances is one of the key skill which again many of the entrepreneurs, they know it, but many of the new entrepreneurs which are really getting into this is they also need to look at where they can leverage finance. The government of India has now announced a whole lot of slew of measures, but how do they tap into that? And of course the mentorship and learning networks, where are those wonderful examples which can be really banked upon, and the learning can happen. Then we move on to the next set of constituency, which is the researchers, technology experts, and many of our institutions actually fall in this category. Now, many of the institutions actually have done wonderful studies on destination carrying capacity, but how they really look at this destination carrying capacity, uh, how it can be applied by the practitioners, how it can be taken up by the policymakers. There are the waste management technologies which have been really piloted and innovated. But again, the big question is how really it fits into the areas where it is required. There are renewable energy options. Now, I think many of the options also are looking at the maintenance part of it. So this is one another area of knowledge which is coming up. Many pilots and demonstration and studies which have actually focusing on the water in the mountains and how you really increase the water use efficiency, how you conserve water, which is one of the key ecosystem services, and also the biodiversity issues, which actually are paramount importance in the area where you want to develop the sustainable mountain tourism. The standards and certifications is something which in some of the cases have been developed, but I think if you look at the larger landscape, the standards and certification which can apply across the stakeholders, I think there's still a lot of improvement has to happen. That's where I think research and more studies and more work is needed. And the digital platforms we talked about from the first session and the advisories which could be of very, very useful to a range of stakeholders when we look at the sustainable mountain tourism. And the resilient mountain value chains, tourism value chains, which includes transboundary angle as well, because the Himalayas do share boundaries with the neighboring countries, and many of the transboundary value chains actually could be of high value to the practitioners as well as the policymakers. Now, the other set of questions are coming from the policymakers because they are looking at what has taken a big hit from the pandemic because of the pandemic, with the tourism sector, a sector which actually had a reasonably very good growth rate of 10%, 8 to 10%, has taken a big hit. Now there is a loss of job, returning migrants, Dr. Rai talked about, the value chain disruption has happened. Now, I think one key figure which was quoted in the last session was also IHR contributing only 4.4% of the GDP of nationally. The contribution of IHR is only 4.4%, and how this can really go up. And there was also an limitation that e-commerce has to be coming in a big way, even in the sustainable mountain tourism. But digital divide, which has not really still put mountains in a favorable condition. There's just 10% penetration so far of the internet connectivity. The large number of issues which the policymakers also grapple is regarding the unmanaged tourism, which actually lead to environmental degradation and loss of cultural values. In fact, if you look at some of the assessment reports, the Environmental Performance Index, only 2 states have had their ranking in EPI, but most of the other states of Himalayan region do not have even ranking out there. So that means a lot more needs to be done to really improve the environmental standards. Now, if we take that mountain tourism as an engine of growth, then how do we really reimagine this sustainable mountain tourism post-pandemic? This is going to be one of the key big ticket item for today's discussion. One that is inclusive and sustainable, create jobs, promotes local culture, is high on environmental performance index. Now, so what is Himalaya Calling? Now, we talked about these 3 big domains, the questions around policy, the science or the research and technologies, and also the practitioners, what they're asking. I think they will get a glimpse of that. So what does the Himalaya Calling actually does? So Himalaya Calling actually, first of all, it builds a support system for many, many practitioners who are out there in the field doing some wonderful job. It tries to bridge this gap, the science, policy, and practice. It connects, it brings that larger connect for taking action at scale. It really supports entrepreneurial ecosystems, and it builds on these questions from these 3 domains. How this is done? This cannot be done, as Dr. Rai was talking about, without collaborations, collaborative culture. So we are looking at the collaborations among different actors and sectors at multiple scales, from local to subnational and national, to achieve what you really envision as sustainable mountain tourism, the targets, vision, and goals. And of course, IMI has a big role in fostering this multi-stakeholders partnerships, and I'm sure Dr. Ramola is really going to build upon that. How Himalaya Calling actually looks at the support system, it looks through the nodes and pilots. So we are looking at the 5 different nodes, and there has been a larger agreement within the smaller core group, and also the inception workshop which happened in February. So we are going to have these five nodes, and if you just imagine there's if you're looking at the mountain tourism and you look at the 5 nodes, so there's a one big requirement which the questions coming from the practitioners also is, how do I communicate my mountain products when I'm looking at the mountain tourism? So communication and campaigns is going to be one of the key support node which can be accessed by the pilots. Research in use and upscaling. So all the ideas which actually came up, the questions which came up on the research side, the science part of it, and also the technological innovations actually also going to be one of the key node to support what the pilots are going to lead and upscale and outscale. The policy and platforms, many a times the wonderful initiatives at the local level are struggling to upscale and outscale. The link with the policy platforms at the sub-national, the state, provincial level, and also at the national level. The partnerships we are going to really discuss today, this is the key focus of today's discussion, how the multi-stakeholders partnership actually is fashioned to make this Himalaya Calling truly owned by multiple stakeholders, as seen as their program. And of course, the Himalayan Knowledge Networks. So if you look at the tourism, sustainable mountain tourism, and if you look at the requirement of the practitioners, where is this network, and how this network can be fostered, where people can really learn what is to be learned and what are the big questions they are asking. So they have somebody to fall back upon. So the networks are going to be a big ticket item. So, and if you imagine the key theme as sustainable tourism, which we are focusing upon today, sustainable mountain tourism, and all the issues like waste management, biodiversity conservation, water, and agriculture. Shifting cultivation, which is more pertinent to the Northeast, but I think if you look at the Pan-Himalayan region as such, mountain agriculture is going to be a big focus. Skill and entrepreneurship is a cross-cutting across all this. And of course, there will be a small hub where the small core group and the pilots which are happening in 4 sites, the leads from the pilots are going to be joining this core group, and also the thematic leads. G.V. Pant Institute of Himalayan Environment and Development, Dr. Raval is here. Good to see Dr. Raval here. And so G.V. Pant provides a secretariat, and ICIMOD also works in tandem with G.V. Pant to facilitate this whole process. But the process is co-created and co-owned by the multiple stakeholders. So thank you very much, Dr. Rai. I'm done. And I'm sure Ritwa is now waiting.
You set the stage. Yeah, you've set the stage very effectively, though you've taken a little more time. Nevertheless, we'll get Mridula Tangirala in immediately. And she is the lead at Tata Trust Tourism Vertical. She's a 97 batch task officer and a graduate from IIM Lucknow and an architect by training. So over to you, Mridula.
Yeah, thank you, IMI and ICIMOD, for organizing this webinar on an aspect of tourism that's perhaps not discussed enough. You've already introduced me. My name is Mridula, anchor tourism interventions within rural upliftment portfolio of Tata Trust. I joined that 3 years back. Before that, I was part of the Taj group. And I would be covering in this presentation my thoughts on ground action networks, collaborations and platforms, gaps, as well as best practices. Hopefully, and as Dr. Rathore amply mentioned, that this is one in the series of dialogues culminating in change on the ground. I begin with highlighting major issues assailing specifically rural tourism, perhaps in some measure also the tourism at large in the country. First of all, I think the biggest thing is we underappreciate and consequently undersell our natural and cultural heritage. This holds true for the communities as well as the travelers, which may stem from not recognizing the communities as the custodians and active caretakers of the heritage. Underappreciation is also the root cause behind unpaid and exploitative use of common resources leading to over-tourism. On the other hand, the players in this universe are made of large number of small operations and with varying degrees of standards. So even though unifying online platforms have emerged in the past 5 years or so, it has not really eased the issue of destination level sustainability. That perhaps is even exacerbated by easy access of remote areas. And now additional issues post-COVID are continued safety concerns on part of both the communities and travelers. And it's creating a new set of challenges that were not there before. Should remote communities open themselves to potential infection, especially when the benefits are happening to a few, while they're seeing that tourists are preferring smaller format operations? Are the establishments geared up to handle the expected hygiene standards, as well as the garbage and pollution that will arise out of it? So all those are the issues, and perhaps a little bit of silver lining that's emerging is the creative ways in which this whole pandemic disruption has forced people to respond and pivot in some ways. So let's begin with exploring the gaps in the tourism value chain at enterprise level as well as at destination level. We talk about individual operations. Mostly we think homestays, but I would also like to say community-based operations are a minuscule segment, but we need to see more of. We need to examine the gaps from the external perspective, from the customer perspective, as well as internal perspective. And it should be covering both tangible and intangible components. So I'm beginning with, say, the built heritage first, because that's the first thing perhaps what an entrepreneur thinks about. As customers, we hope to see the picture that's on the left, nice, pristine, beautiful village. But what we get in reality are pictures on the right, which is a little bit more of the mess that we have already created in the cities. And let's ask ourselves, why does it come to be this way? Perhaps it's the cumulative effect of the choices individual entrepreneurs make. And they are constantly making choices about what to do and how to do. So they're thinking, should I restore? Should I raise everything to ground and have a new build? Should I prefer traditional aesthetics, or should I just be dictated by modern materials and the convenience it brings? Should I pander to customer convenience, or should I take a stand for what this place stands for? And often, right now, it's comprising as a debate between either or. But does it have to be this way? Why is it like this? And often it's like the choices are dictated of what is possible. And the fact is that restoration is expensive, time consuming, excruciatingly difficult due to the difficulty in finding the right expertise in design, craftsmanship, execution. So what are the examples, best practices, and how have they bucked the trend? So at an enterprise level, for me, a good example is Shami Sarhat, a resort in Hotka, which is a good and a bold example of community distilling their heritage into a unique product, rather than only perpetuating what exists and what the customer is used to and so on. But more importantly, especially for this kind of dialogue, I would like to look at how larger scale adaptations have happened. And I think Ladakh is a fascinating story, and I think it's done a much better job than anywhere else of creating this amalgamation of traditional practices and modern materials, and still creating a very homogeneous kind of look And that, I think, happens because of a consistent architectural vocabulary that comprises of ready-made materials like these windows that you see on that picture, and moldings, etc., that you see. And an ecosystem seems to have developed, which is nurturing local materials, local craftsmanship. And we need to pause and ask ourselves what needs to happen differently at the kind of dialogue we are having, so that everywhere else in the country have a similar kind of harmony and alignment between various players. So that's an example of a hard element. Now, let's say a soft element. On the left-hand side, everybody recognizes a ubiquitous dhaba selling things, generic preparations, omelets, Maggi, aloo paratha, so on and so forth. Food has been an outcome of many layers. We all know that ecological, climatic, cultural layers working over decades and centuries. 50 years back, when it moved away from our traditional farming practices, and very few people have done painstakingly work now to document it yet again, and that Bara Anaja, 12 grains, this book by Vijay Jardariji for me, is one of those steps that we need to take to again balance that farming nutrition nexus that existed. And now, when with health consciousness coming in, with that market demand for organic coarse grains, demand side is primed. How will tourism drive the supply side collaboration such that these kind of winds of change happen? How do we see less of Lay's chips and more of the ragi biscuits? That is perhaps being created by SHGs and so on and so forth. A few organizations, which were tourism organizations, tried to pivot around these elements, but enough base was not there. So, time to take a pause and say, how can we build on these? Proof of concept has happened with market demand to some extent. Going on to intangible heritage. Tourism outfits, and as a single entrepreneur, often they don't have any visibility into research and documentation of very, very localized heritage of that area. Another, this is one of those things that came into focus when some of the organization tried to build on this aspect to still keep the connect with the customer. Some interesting examples have come up. Voices of Rural India is one of them. It's a from the ground up documentation project. Responsible Tourism Mission Kerala tried doing a very interesting exercise where almost, I think, 3,000 experiences are available on one platform. You can drop down to a district and a village and then see what kind of experiences happen. So these are the kind of platforms and collaborations we need to see. Waste management is another. So coming to now destination level issues. And on the left-hand side, I've taken this picture from a blog that is lamenting, irresponsible tourists. But I think the solution has to come up through more innovative and more organized kind of interventions. So in the middle, this picnic camping signage that you see, it's actually from a village in Nagaland called Zuleke. It's a popular picnic site only 3 hours from Kohima. The community got together, started charging just 10 rupees per person. And they made sure parking was fine, was done properly, that garbage was collected, that it was disposed of responsibly. And then over time, they added layers of trekking, camping, and more community participation. We need to see more of that. And I'm glad that our new tourism policy talks about destination level organizations. So hopefully these grounds up, panchayat level institutions can step up and be those destination level organizations. It's not easy to handle waste. Waste warriors will tell you that, but they've also demonstrated it's possible. Another aspect, hopefully, that of community participation that can be handled grounds up is that when a lot of community members pay the price of tourism, are we doing enough to track it? And Planet Happiness is one example where they have a survey and a methodology through which they track communities' response to tourism. And hopefully that galvanizes dialogue and action. So I think we all need to think continuously on what kind of new platform collaborations we need to build to change the status quo. And when I was trying to think, I thought agriculture perhaps could be a nice example, which is a similar kind of a profile, large number of individual operations, and similar problems. You know, you don't have access to an ecosystem, you don't have access to expertise and technical inputs, etc. And how they solve it through village level entrepreneurs, through a village level center that procures inputs, and there can be a way of loaning machinery. How do we draw similar parallels for tourism? Can there be laundry services? Can there be cleaning services? How can people connect to various kinds of experts, multi-sectoral experts that Mr. Rathore was talking about? And therefore, the case I would like to make and the thought I would like to leave is that perhaps we need to change our paradigm a little bit. Stop thinking from just an entrepreneur level and think of destination first. Think, what does that destination has as a USP? What ecosystem partners will cultivate that USP? And then only drill down to a tourism experience and the hardware and the software kind of thing. So we have to bring about this whole power of aggregation, specialization, and an ecosystem creation. And these are some of the questions that I always find myself grappling with. These are the challenges of tourism within rural communities. And we need to perhaps find modules for peer-to-peer learning. We need to find case study repository. We need to create skill exchange platforms. And we need to create partnerships. So these are some of my thoughts, and I really look forward to everybody adding on to that. Thank you so much, ICIMOD and IMI.
Thank you, Mridula. That was really wonderful. And now, without further ado, can we get Mr. Sushil Ramola to share his thoughts, or rather integrate the thoughts between what Brij Rathore had set the stage in terms of saying that what is it that we need to do, and then we have a case. I mean, and a case has been built by Mridula at the ground level as to what things are going wrong, and especially in the mountain states, how tourism is really taking off actually in the wrong direction. And the pandemic has allowed us to take that pause and look for more innovative solutions. And yet, at the same time, to see how our young people, and especially the young people, can profit from it. So Mr. Ramola is a social entrepreneur and a civil society volunteer. He is the founding member and a former president of the Integrated Mountain Initiative. He is the chair of Be Able, an organization dedicated to building skills in our youth from less fortunate backgrounds, working in over 17 states in India. He is an alumnus of IIM Ahmedabad. So, Mr. Ramola, can you share your thoughts with us and build on what has already been said so far? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rai. I think Mr. Rathore has given a very, very broad overview and linked that overview of the tourism with the Himalaya Calling initiative that ICIMOD and GB Pant NIHE have initiated in India. And Mridula ji has taken it to the ground and given a very, very excellent exposition of what ought to happen, where is the need for partnerships, specifically to the tourism. So I'm going to go a step back and link these two, an overview and the ground realities, into the subject of today, which is the multi-stakeholder collaborative platforms and partnerships. I think these both two terms are very, very important. Both platforms are important, as well as partnerships. And let me state right in the beginning that in our country, partnerships, collaborations are not something which come naturally. They are not a part of the way we grow up, a part of the learning in our schools. So we have to learn in the current situation. We have to learn them much more. And a couple of slides, I think all of you know this, but let me go back. Since we are talking of multi-stakeholders, who are the stakeholders for the tourism domain that we are wanting to impact through Himalaya Calling? I think, I have listed some of them here: government, market, civil society, communities, panchayats, which Mridula ji talked about, the target groups whom we are going to impact. And we have to build them both top down and bottom up, from global to local bodies and backwards. And as was mentioned, science to policy to practice, we have to build collaborations amongst them. And we have to also build sector specific collaborations among the players, among the enabler ecosystem players and competitors and the other parts. So there is a wide array of stakeholders that we need to work with. And what it requires really is the next slide. So I think, today's world, in this project, for example, the tourism initiative, I think there are so many pieces lying scattered around, and there are so many issues which tourism has to deal with. Mridula talked about some of those issues. What should responsible tourism be like? There are economic, social, and environmental factors. There are traditional and issues of culture, issues, and the current and future. What do we want to build as a society? There are themes. There are themes we need to build around, which are local, which are the assets she mentioned about the area. So there is a multi-dimensionality to this nature of issues. And we also have I think pandemic has shown us that we are also in a very uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And large stakeholders I mentioned, and the results are not going to happen in the 1 month or 1 year. It requires the longer term thinking, and scale and quality cannot be obtained without partnerships. So I think it's imperative that we start thinking partnerships. And it's fortunately for us in this project of Himalaya Calling, it's, as Mr. Rathore mentioned, building multi-stakeholder partnerships is one of the nodes which supports this initiative. And I'm going to talk now very specifically with the domain of, it will apply to the domain of tourism, but I'm going to specifically talk about this Himalaya Calling initiative and what is the goal and role of multi-stakeholder partnerships in this, so that we can start thinking through our collaborations. I think the collaborations start now. How can we get people at all these levels, at the policy, practice, research, and right from local to global levels, get engaged in building these partnerships? And it'll deliver that. I have listed down the 5 goals, outcomes, outputs of this Himalaya Calling project. And the 4th is functional collaborative platforms, which have to be there to build scale, both scale in terms of vertical scale, size, as well as the reach. Both require collaborative partnership, and these have to be therefore handled at 2 levels. One is internal within the Himalaya Calling nodes. There is a pilot which will be implemented across some of the Himalayan states. And how do we work together, and how do we nodes interact with each other? And also we have to then for each of these, we have to take it deeper for each project, each pilot. We have to then engage the external stakeholders, which I have mentioned. Some of them I have mentioned here, from civil society organizations, business enterprises, entrepreneurs, local NGOs, government agencies, community players, panchayats, and also the people who can support them. There'll be some primary support organizations. There'll be some secondary organizations, such as Mridula talked about, that how can tourism be the anchor for other things around it, agriculture, for example, the water things, the waste, the culture, and many other things, adventures, and so on and so forth. So we have to build both primary partnerships as well as secondary partnerships. Yeah. And the key roles the partnerships node has to play, has to build the strategy and the processes. There has to be a process of onboarding the partners with very clear-cut strategy and criteria. The networks have to be created, and these networks have to be multidimensional. I'm just talking of science, policy, practice as one of the dimensions. There have to be people who champion these platforms or champion these partnerships. These have to be change leaders, because we are talking of something which we need to achieve going forward if we have to do it the way it was talked about in the previous presentation. And therefore we have to bring in people who are credible, both as individuals and institutions. We have to bring in entrepreneurs. We have to bring in private sector players, because they are the engines who are going to run this thing so we have to bring in the right people in. And therefore, building this requires the role of this partnerships platform would be to organize consultations, dialogues with a very, very clear-cut agenda emanating from the goals and outputs that we want to achieve. And then they have to be taken from national to regional to the pilot site to the local bodies where these pilots are operating. And then at the end, these have to provide solutions and some ideas for upscaling, outscaling, and design more effective policies. They have to feed back into the right policies. So there is some work plan around it, and I'm just, let me start with this thing on the right. There is a hub, as Mr. Rathore mentioned. There is the Himalaya Calling hub. There are different nodes, and the partnership has to be nurturing both the outside, the core groups, and the implementation part, as well as the nodes which support these. And therefore, we have to start from the work plan over the next couple of years, has to be preparing a database, identifying champions in line with what I said in the previous slide as the role, convene meetings, consultative meetings, work with the various multi-level networks, and create functional platforms which can deliberate on the issues which are required. So this is the scope that building multi-stakeholder partnerships has. I would say in the end that today, if we have to achieve anything, especially we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat, but that cannot be done by centralizing things. We can be Atmanirbhar only if at the local level, at the regional level, at the national level, we can synergize our efforts and create a whole which is bigger than the sum of the parts. And the partnership, therefore, in my mind, play a very, very important role. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramola. It is very heartening to see that there is a well thought through process to take something like tourism and see how we can integrate it within the concept of having these partnerships at the local level, at the state level, at a maybe at a meso level, and then also at the national level. And with these partnerships, which is also going the sustainable development goals 17, which you mentioned, is so very important. It's been recognized. So in order to facilitate further thought on this, and there will always be bridging, to bridge the gaps in policy and practice, the role of partnerships for the new normal. This is the next topic, because we'd like to build on whatever has been said before. So for this, I will request Dr. Sejal Vora to come in. Dr. Sejal Vora has worked in the field of natural resource management and sustainable development for over 30 years. She is currently the Director of Programs at the WWF India in New Delhi, where she provides strategic direction to a multidisciplinary team. As a personal endeavor towards conservation, and this I must emphasize, Dr. Sejal has set up the Jabar Khet Nature Reserve near Mussoorie, Uttarakhand, as the state's first private nature reserve, aiming to demonstrate the links between nature conservation and local economic development. So over to you, Sejal. You have 15 minutes.
So I want to start with an apology because although I was given a topic and I will stick broadly to that topic, I just thought that it'll be interesting, for all of us who are like now probably facing webinar fatigue, to actually hear something from the horse's mouth rather than something theoretical. So just to let you know that I have been locked down since March in a tourism destination in the Himalayas. And I've actually seen the whole tourism scenario play out in the pandemic, context. And I've looked at it both from the point of view of mainstream tourism and also from the point of view of niche tourism. And what I'd like to do is share my thoughts in watching this whole scenario unfold, and to also examine what are the opportunities that this brings us from a very first-hand perspective. So my talk is going to be not theory, but very first-hand and very topical and very specific. So forgive me for that. It's a slight deviation, but I just thought I really needed to share these thoughts. And this is the right forum, I think, to share these ideas with. So just to start with, to give a context, is that my family runs a hotel in Mussoorie. And as Mr. Rai said, I have set up this nature reserve, which is an alternative kind of tourism model. So I've seen both the mainstream tourism impacts and the alternative tourism impacts. And I want to share these with you just to show how we can link these issues. So I'm going to look at this, I'm going to share this from three lenses. One is from the lens of the private sector, the mainstream private sector, tourism sector. One is going to be from the lens of the tourists themselves and how this has impacted tourist behavior and how we can build on that. And the third is the links with conservation, because I'm a WWF person, so I have to talk about conservation links. So I'm going to look at it from these three lenses and then talk a little bit about how I think this can be linked through the partnership model. So let's look at the industry first. And as I said, we are right in the thick of that industry. And how did COVID impact the tourism industry? We know that the tourism industry was one of the most hard hit because of COVID. And what happened here is that jobs, the whole industry dried up almost overnight. So there was no preparation, there was no period of relaxation. There was actually very little support from the government as well for this sector. It was not seen as a very high priority sector when COVID initially hit. So the tourism sector was left on its own. It was kind of left to fend for itself. So what happened? What happened was that they tried their hardest to keep going, but there was no chance. So essentially a lot of the workforce was let go. So most of the hotels and restaurants in tourist towns in the Himalayas had to let go of their workforce. What happened? Most of them returned to their villages. These villages were also facing not only people coming back from places in the Himalayas itself, but also people coming back from all over India and also other parts of the world. So Uttarakhand in particular, where I live, has a large migratory workforce working in all parts of the Gulf, working in South Africa, working in many other parts of the world. All of these people started coming back. So initially there was this feeling, that, okay, so all of these people are coming back to the villages. That's really great, because what will happen is mountain agriculture will get revived. Because a lot of agriculture was left fallow because of lack of labor, people had migrated out. So the sense was that with all these young people coming back, at least if tourism dies out, agriculture will get revived. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. What happened was that a lot of the young people who came back didn't really want to go back to agriculture. They were not geared up. They had actually never farmed in their lives. They had moved out when they were young, and they weren't fit to come back and start doing agriculture again. So you actually had a lot of people now who are sitting there and essentially doing three things. One is some of them are trying to go back now that things are moving again. They're trying to see if they can get their old jobs back and they want to move out again. Others are willing to do any job. So you have well-trained chefs, well-trained people from the hospitality sector who are essentially willing to pretty much do any job, even, saying, make me a chowkidar, I don't care, just give me a job. So they're willing to go back to anything. And there's a third sector, which is actually looking for opportunities. And this is the interesting part, because there's a whole group of people who've come back to the mountains with new ideas, new exposure, new skills, and an open mind to be doing something different. So interestingly, and they're also quite disillusioned with what has happened to them. So they don't really want to go back essentially to what they were doing before and then get a hit again. So there is this opportunity of a lot of young people who are well-trained, who have been exposed, who are well-educated, who are willing to try new things. And interestingly, I've been getting a lot of young people coming to my nature reserve and saying, what's this all about? Can we come and look at nature guiding as an opportunity? So there is this opportunity there. And I'm just going to put that on hold and park it and go to the next sector, which is the tourist. So tourist behavior has changed. And this is something that is very apparent that we are seeing in our town. So now suddenly tourists want to experience nature. It's become the thing, right? They want to go further out. They don't want to sit in the town. They want to go away from the conventional places. I don't know if any of you know Mussoorie, but everybody wanted to go to Kempty Falls. Everybody. Now suddenly it's like, no, I want to go out and I want to do a hike. I want to do a walk. I want to do a trek. So tourist behavior has changed. They've kind of rediscovered nature. Just to give you a context, I have had more visitors to my nature reserve this October than I have ever had in the past 5 years. Okay, so that was a manifestation to me that something has changed out there. And also I'm getting a different kind of tourist, which is very interesting, because earlier you would get people coming to a nature reserve who are already interested in nature. They would seek me out and they would come and say, we want to see. Now I'm getting people who have never actually stepped into a forest in their lives. They're actually stepping into a forest for the first time. They've never walked on a trail before. So it's really interesting because it's opened up a whole new group of people who will appreciate nature and hopefully become champions of nature tourism in the future. The other thing that has happened is that mainstream hotels who never thought of sending their guests to a nature reserve are suddenly now rediscovering nature. So many hotels in the town are now starting to explore and offer their guests nature trails, nature walks. I mean, these were things that they never offered before. They were offering, barbecues and that kind of thing. Suddenly they're offering nature walks. So there is also an opportunity to transform the mass tourism sector. The mass tourism sector has rediscovered nature. So it's really been interesting for me to see that there is a potential now to form partnerships, between niche tourism ventures and mass tourism ventures. It's a really interesting door that's opening up. And the third thing I want to talk about is the link with conservation. I'm going to join all these dots together, so just bear with me. The third thing I want to talk about is conservation. So we all heard the stories, right? We heard the stories that with COVID coming in, there's been an increase in poaching in national parks. Many wildlife sanctuaries were talking about increases in poaching, etc. This was very apparent. It was clear to me. We suddenly saw a resurgence in poaching in our small nature reserve, which we thought we had eliminated completely. So it was quite clear that less tourists and less interaction and less activity in the forest meant that there were these other kinds of things going on. Poaching was going on, which means, it tells me that well-managed, decentralized tourism can actually be a tool for conservation. Which people talk about. And I was a bit skeptical, but I saw it with my own eyes that actually this is true. So the idea is, can we create a network of these kinds of small natural and cultural areas all across the Himalayas with a pool of well-trained community members who can actually take people around in these areas? So just to indicate to you the potential, when we first started this little nature reserve, which is only 100 acres, it was a degraded forest. It was just a degraded hillside. Locals were completely skeptical. They said, what are these guys doing? Who's the hell is going to come to this degraded hillside, and why will anybody, even pay money to come here? 5 years later, when it's restored, they've seen it. They've seen the transformation. They've seen the transformation both from a conservation point of view and from an economic point of view. So the sarpanch of a nearby village the other day came to me and said, I'll speak in Hindi for those of you. Hamara bhi to jungle hai, hum kyun nahi kar sakte hain? So, so now they're all sort of waking up and saying, we all have these kinds of patches of forest. This kind of small degraded patch of forest, to hamare sabke paas hai. So why are we not doing this? How come you're doing this? So there is this realization that there is a value to these small patches of forest, and can we create a network of these kinds of conservation areas managed by communities which are then being, spread out all across the Himalayas. Because if there is a higher demand, if more tourists are now wanting to go to natural areas, we're going to need more natural areas for tourists to go to. We're going to need a whole network of these. 1 or 2 places will not be enough. So how can we link these? And I do think that there's an opportunity to transform, tourism in the Himalayas in a small way if we link this. So I have 3 ideas which I'm going to put on the table in front of you. You can probably reject them outright or think this is radical. One is, we need to develop an extension service for rural and nature-based tourism, just like we have for agriculture. We have agricultural extension services which penetrate everywhere. They penetrate every village, extension workers. They kind of, so every village knows the basics of agriculture and new ideas in agriculture, what's coming up, what's working, what's not working. We need to have this kind of an extension service for tourism so that in every village, there are people who can talk about the natural and cultural heritage. It should not be 1 or 2 people. It should penetrate into the villages. And we should be able to map out and say, in each village, who are these people? Especially, as I said, these new people who have come back and are looking for new interesting things to do. Can we actually train them and create a peer-to-peer learning model? One of the things I learned is that when my nature guides, who are now, like rock stars in the community because they're so, everybody like looks up to them and says, wow, these guys are fantastic. If they become the trainers, then all the other youngsters who are of their age, and it's already happened, they've become the role models in my town. So everybody wants to be like them. So use them, so we create a peer-to-peer learning extension model where every village with potential should have people who can talk about the natural and cultural heritage without having to seek out, who is there in which village, where do I find a resource person? Right now, it's really hard to find a good trained nature guide. But we need to create this kind of just spread it out as much as possible. The second thing is, as I said, you don't need very special places. Jabal Khet Nature Reserve is not particularly special, but everybody who comes is excited, thrilled, and willing to actually, give us resources to make this work. So it doesn't have to be a mega thing. It doesn't have to have mega fauna. It really, what people tell me is the most exciting thing about the reserve is the local guides. They say the passion and the commitment of these boys and the walks they take us to is what made the walk for us. It's not that we saw a bird or we saw this, but it was the people who made it. So if we can again, create a network of these small areas that, restore them, little degraded things, patches of forest all across the Himalayas, we can map these out and create this network. And then the idea would be to link tourism hubs with these small patches of areas. So you take a Nainital, or you take a Ranikhet, or you take a Gangtok, and around that there should be a whole network of these kinds of areas where people can go to. So each major destination should have a lot of these kind of smaller destinations that they can access easily and where people can go and visit and immerse themselves in nature. And the third thing I think is an opportunity, and this is a bit controversial, and I'm still thinking this through in my own head, is how do we link the mainstream tourism industry and the niche tourism industry? Do they need to be separate? Can they not be more closely linked? Can they not be jointly marketed? Can we not kind of have this kind of a partnership between the more mainstream private sector tourism, which is not going away? It's not going to go away. We are not, all the wishful thinking in the world, the mass tourism industry is here to stay. And then, so right now we have a mass tourism industry and we have a niche tourism industry. Is there a way to link the two? So already what we are seeing is we're starting to see that major hotel chains are now linking up with, nature walks, nature trails, with the Jabal Khet Nature Reserve, with some other nature reserve, with a community heritage site. So you create this linkage between the two types of tourism and not an artificial divide between these types of tourism. So there can be actually, an exchange between the two, and that will actually create more jobs because many of these larger places will have to employ youth who can take people out on walks, etc. So so this is sort of the vision that is floating around in my head, is that maybe COVID gives us this opportunity because tourists are changing behavior. Mainstream tourism, private sector is also recognizing the value of nature tourism, and nature tourism itself needs to scale up because right now it's too small. It's just a few good initiatives here and there. We need to scale up. So can this provide us an opportunity to link these three things, which will not only just create more jobs, but also create a cadre of people who can do multiple things. So, a person in a hotel should be able to do hospitality, but also should be able to talk about nature and culture. So it's not about just creating one cadre of very specialized people, but actually mainstreaming sustainable tourism across the board so that everybody is able to do multiple things depending on the opportunity that arises. So one day he can be a nature guide, the next day he can be working in a restaurant, the third day he can be doing something else, the fourth day he can be doing organic farming. So one individual can actually do multiple things rather than just saying you're specialized only in this. So that is my vision, is that in the future we have sustainable tourism which kind of penetrates everywhere and doesn't sit in a niche by itself. Over. That's what I
Thank
wanted to say.
you, Sejal. That was very moving, actually, because I think it comes from what you are experiencing, and I think sharing it with our audience has been just fantastic. And I've learned so much. It actually resonates with a lot of work that I already do. So thank you very much. But at the same time, I think you really touched on the whole issue of how you can build linkages and partnerships. And this will require us to think more deeply on what already has been touched upon by the previous speakers. So now to take you from Mussoorie, let's take you to Kohima, to Mr. Alam Temshi Jamir. Mr. Jamir, will you show yourself? That's good. Thank you. Mr. Alam Temshi Jamir will speak also about his own experience, really at the policy level, what they have been able to do with returning migrants, and also how they have built some of the collaborations and use some of the reskilling in Nagaland. And that will actually inform us all directly about how partnerships can be built at the level of across the nation, as well as at the local level. So let us hear from Alam Temshi Jamir ji, who is, by the way, the former Chief Secretary of Nagaland, and also a founder member and of IMI, as well as its previous president, former president of IMI. He also, I would say, dabbles with politics, and he's very much in politics in Nagaland. That is something which many people don't know, but nevertheless, I think, Mr. Jamir, will you tell us about your experience in Nagaland? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pillai. Always a pleasure to be in touch with you. And actually, I was also thinking the same thing which Madam Sejal Wara has been talking about, this thing called webinar fatigue. Everywhere is coming webinar fatigue. But this evening, after listening to the former speakers like Rathore, Nirgula, and Sejal Wara, and Ramola ji, it's been a very interesting listening to all the things that are happening around, and then what we can learn. And in this connection, actually, I will not be providing any academic inputs. Only basically some things from personal experience and personal knowledge of what I've seen and I have observed the past few days, and based on which the government policies can be built up. So to start with a little focus on tourism. And the Nagaland experience and what the other states can learn from this, and then also some ideas about how the partnerships could be built up, how the collaborations can be built up among the states. That will be the focus. And of course, I will touch upon the efforts of the returning the economy that we have built up towards the end. Now, Nagaland today, we are faced with the dilemma that the Hornbill Festival is not going to be held. There's been a little talk that government was going to hold it, but there was a tremendous amount of criticism against the government policy for holding the Hornbill Festival. And eventually, actually, government was actually thinking of holding it as a virtual Hornbill Festival, but the people had misunderstood. Now, that is the kind of reaction which we get from people all over, and that has made the government, very fear-stricken. One commissioner secretary medical was almost disciplinary action was almost taken against him, but he was just transferred out simply because of something happened with COVID, and then he had sent some people to Twinsang without the approval of the government, and then there was a reaction. There was a lot of outbursts of the society. Some ministers were heckled and thrown out of the district, and like that. That is the amount of fear and the hesitation which is being created amongst the people, and which is stopping the government from formulating policies. The government, the government just gets a thing and then just wants to do only the right thing before the public, and therefore there is no forward movement. And in this, actually, the tourism department, as again pointed out by Madam Sejal, the tourism has been left out. So also many of the other economic sectors. The tourism department had submitted, phase-wise lifting of the entry of tourists into the state, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They had got in touch with the tour operators, they had got in touch with the hoteliers, but the government is still to respond. So it seems that the government actually a little petrified with the present situation. And we really don't know how to move the things forward. But one or two good things that the government has done is they are going ahead with, say, virtual tourism, getting people to remind them what is happening in Nagaland, what can happen in Nagaland, and then to have a virtual connect with the people who would like to see what is possible. So that ultimately, at the post-COVID, when the pandemic is gone, then the people will hunger and thirst for coming to Nagaland. So that keeping alive the tourism concept by this certain virtual tourism going on from time to time is actually not such a bad idea. I would suggest that the other states also take up this concept and keep on doing this virtual tourism by keeping the idea of tourism alive in the states. Now, we are talking of post-COVID. And I think with the vaccine that is now around the corner, almost being introduced in society, it will reach the people, and the reverse process of whatever the lockdowns have taken place will be opened up. And I feel that instead of the pandemic, there may be pandemonium with people wanting to rush to all corners of the earth, all corners of the world. And that is something which we will have to look forward to, but at the same time, we should control. And that is one of the post-COVID situations which I am actually concerned about. And I think the mountain states also need to be concerned, because we cannot just throw open things and people who are wanting to come, let everybody rush in and then damage the ecology, the environment, and then the carrying capacity of the mountains. And all these people going around in the post-COVID era could be damaging for society and the ecology and the environment. So that is one thing which the states could keep in mind. Now, the aspect of collaboration and partnership. So particularly during this post-COVID, during this COVID period, we have been examining and thinking. And we have come to realize and really understand that the northeastern states by themselves are too small. They have to collaborate with each other. They have to partner with each other if they have to evolve any kind of tourism or any economy. That partnership is necessary. And for this, I was only thinking that perhaps a body like the Northeastern Council could play a bigger role to bring about this partnership, this collaboration between the states, whether it is in the field of tourism or agriculture or any other activities, including trade and development, connecting with the Northeast and the Look-East policies of Government of India, I think the states should focus on collaboration with each other. Only since the day before yesterday, the Assam people in Karbi Anglong district, they were planning to boycott, to hold a band against Nagaland indefinite. That would have affected Nagaland very badly. But better senses prevail, some dialogue and discussions are going on. So now likewise, if one state starts blocking the other state's leeway and then prevent the movement, whether COVID or post-COVID, there can be no essential development as such. And therefore, this issue of collaboration and partnership among the states, which is being selected as a subject today, should be given very high priority. And IMI could, talk about this with the states. That is one. Then the other aspect is this medical knowledge. The lack of medical knowledge about diseases, maybe COVID, maybe later on some other disease may come into the world. So we can never tell what they are doing with all these laboratories in China and all these kind of things they're being accused of. So once this kind of diseases hit mankind and this kind of pandemics come about, we should give a lot of attention to the medical, the development of the medical facilities. The medical facilities have gained a lot of ground during this COVID. BSL labs have been set up and all this in the various places in the state. But for promoting collaborations, partnerships, this medical knowledge and propagation of the knowledge, so that people don't get too scared about people coming in or going out. A lot of fear is there, and that fear has to be slowly removed, and that can be done only through proper medical knowledge and this given. So this medical knowledge and attention and other things to be given high attention is something which is being realized in Nagaland. Then we come to the returnees. Before that, let me just stress the point. At a time like COVID pandemic, there is the need to address the issues of communication. Our telecom, the IT, has been horrible. Geo network has been failing us. It has started so beautifully, but it has been failing us. BSNL is BSNL. Airtel also, it is lackluster, and the people are suffering. And that is the reason why an e-commerce platform that we had started, the Yellow Chain, to try to get people to get into small business and start their own e-commerce on our platform, then help each other. These things are failing. So far, only about 1,000 people have registered so far on the Yellow Chain forum. And that is basically because the connectivity and the connection among the people, they can hardly have talks and discussions, leave alone the data transfer. So the IT has to be given a lot of attention by the government, and for which I think that even involves I was talking about the virtual tourism in the earlier, and the IT is a part of life, and therefore this has to be really upgraded. Otherwise, we cannot talk of tourism, or we cannot talk of any other industry or commerce today with a poor IT coverage. And then I think this similar IT coverage issues are there with all the northeastern states, and therefore this must be attended to. And so I was talking about this Yellow Chain, and started this e-commerce. Now, regarding the people who are coming, the reverse migration, I think at the SMDS hosted by the IMI, this is going to be one big issue that will be discussed, the migration issue. But the reverse migration issue has become a big problem. Things are now lying idle, but we are so concerned that there's likelihood of it exploding at some time. 40,000 people have returned back to the state, and most of them are now jobless. So government is trying to create platforms by which they can create jobs. And we have had great help by Mr. Mahajan, who has given us some job metrics. We're still working on it. We have created a digital employment exchange where people can register. And through that, again, the people who can employ them registered, and some exchanges going on in some ways. And then this is giving some kind of hope among the people. So that is about the e-commerce. And I've had in mind. And I think I will end up with that, with the hope that this vaccine will be soon available to the people, maybe within the next 5-6 months, and the preparation for the post.
Okay. Thank you, Alim Temshiji, for that wonderful scenario that you have painted of what kind of issues need to be tackled, basic issues that need to be tackled, even if we want to take the work that we are talking about, the partnerships, etc., in places in the Northeast. That you mentioned about the interconnectivity or the blocking of this brings to us to mind what is going on between Assam and Mizoram as well. So those are real life issues which really bring to the fore the need for interconnectivity at different levels. And you also mentioned about NEC playing a more proactive role. So I hope we have some friends from NEC who are, I think, also joined today. They would also take this message with them. Now having kind of seen the flavor of what is happening, I'd like to bring some voices from the ground. Even though we did have Sejal giving us a real voice from the ground, but we have Mr. Mihin Dolo, who has, who is presently working with the Northeastern Council, part of the Northeastern Council, the Northeastern Regional Community Resource Management Project, NERCOMP, under the NEC. And he has done his postgraduate degree in botany, and he's a holder of a postgraduate gold medalist and Chancellor gold medalist for his academic excellence. So, Mihin, we'd like to hear from you a little bit about how you can connect the ecosystems that might have to be made at the ground level. Basically, you have about 7 minutes to explain, because you're part of a project of the Himalaya Calling, I think in Changlang district. So in your opinion, how would stakeholders at that particular level can be brought together? And, and if you can answer this specific question, that will really add value. Thank you, Mihin.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share the experience, what we had in NERCOM. Basically, major challenges we are facing in tourism sector is the connectivity. One is the road connectivity. Another is the network, telephone network. No. So just I'll take one example from West Garo Hills in Chandigarh place. We try to link up with the Airbnb so that they can directly book through online, and then it can be directly connected with the place. So later on, we face a lot of challenges on the internet connectivity. So in the context of notice, what I feel is if we really, the government, if they really want to improve the tourism sector, the major thing they have to address is one is the road network, and another is the mobile internet connectivity. No, if they address these two, the people, as per our experience, the community people, they will come up with different kind of homestay. So if we see the example of Arunachal, like in Lower Subansiri district, though connectivity is not good there, even then the lot of, in like Zero, the lot of homestay is coming up. So because of the Zero Music Festival, like that in other part of the Arunachal also, like Eastern Arunachal, in Tirap, Changlang, Londing, we are trying to create some kind of network, and we, for that region, we established one guest house also, tourist kind of tourist lodge to promote the tourism. But then the main challenge we are facing is the road connectivity. Most of the time, the road blockage is there, and then sometimes the tourist people, they stuck there, and then they don't want to come back. No, this kind of challenges is there. So another thing I have observed is, like in the case of Zero, the too much flow of tourists also is threat to the ecosystem. There's a lot of one is the threat to the culture, and another is threat to the ecosystem. A lot of pollution is happening there. Support that the lot of organization is coming together to address this issue, but till that they are not able to address, because it's one time at one time huge number of tourism used to come, particularly in the Zero Music Festival, and they have another that bird watching festival, that kind of thing is there. So we need to understand all these things, and then if we address all these issues properly, then we can connect in different way. So now we, from NERCOM side, we are trying is kind of farm-based tourism. No? It will directly link up with the kind of ecotourism only. So it will link up with the agriculture, mainly agriculture, horticulture, and other kind of farm-based activities. So we started on that line. We don't have much experience on that, but then we feel that this will link with the ecological system with the tourism. No, so a lot of the high-end tourism, they are interested on this line. That's why we are trying to link up those kind of tourism. So from my side, what I have experienced at the ground level, just I share this viewpoint. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Actually, you have reiterated a lot of points which already Alim Tanshi Jamil has already mentioned, that we need to get right before we can even move forward. So now we come, we'll take you straight away to Lachik, who comes, who's speaking to us from Ladakh. You're there, right, in Ladakh, Lachik?
Yes, I'm here.
So Lachik is, she's the co-founder of Hati Ladakh and founder of Dolkar. Both are startups. Interesting business ideas in the artisan and vacation rental space. She moved to Ladakh 3 years ago with an interest in sustainable tourism. She has a very interesting background. And she's perhaps an appropriate person to share her views on today's topic. So, Lachik, you might have got the understanding of what we're trying to get at in terms of, the whole issue of how we can build partnerships at the local level. And so what is your experience after coming back into Ladakh and trying to build an ecosystem of, say, business? How is can you share some of your insights from Ladakh? Because interestingly, even Mridula touched upon the whole aspect of how, local materials have been used, local architecture has been used to fashion out the kind of space. Maybe it's the distance also that has had an impact. So can you share with us a little bit of your thoughts on this? You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, sir, and good evening, all of you. Firstly, thank you, IMI and ICIMOD, for putting together such an important discussion. Sir, with your permission, I'd actually like to share, my opinion on the issues from ground related to, in the context of COVID and the current situation in terms of tourism and how MSMEs are affected by it. Uh, so, the world faces an unprecedented global health emergency with an unparalleled impact on our society and livelihoods. Travel and tourism is among the sectors most affected by the pandemic, and urgent support is required given the number of jobs that are at risk. In Ladakh, we know that tourism accounts for about 60% of the local GNP, and the impact of the pandemic on tourism has also indirectly affected other sectors such as agriculture, handicraft, or even construction, which also means that the tourism industry has the capacity to drive the recovery of these sectors. Tourism, being a labor intensive sector, has particularly affected the most vulnerable groups of the population, including women, youth, and rural communities dependent on tourism driven businesses such as trekking. A single trekking experience not only supports remote villages that provide homestays, camping grounds, but also provides income opportunities to the underskilled locals like guides, cooks, helpers, potters, ponymen, who are all currently jobless. Supporting tourism will support jobs and livelihoods, and this can happen by incentivizing job retention, supporting the self employed, and protecting the vulnerable groups of the society. We know that over tourism and its impact on the resources, urban rural migration, and inequitable wealth distribution have always been the key issues of the tourism industry, especially in the Himalayan region. And the pandemic has given us an opportunity to build back greener and more sustainably and accelerate the shift towards a more inclusive economy. Due to the fear of the pandemic, youth and people originally from the mountain communities have moved back to their native villages, which also provides a great opportunity for green skill and digital skill development, or even promote indigenous traditional practices and new job opportunities to reduce the urban rural migration issue post the pandemic. And over promotion of saturated tourism destinations before the pandemic highlights the importance of diversifying our tourism products to also ensure the income distribution for a more equitable and inclusive form of development. Another on ground sort of situation is that farmers that are dependent on the F&B sector of the tourism industry, the handicraft industry driven by tourism, or even small local shops have been affected by the pandemic. The problem about promoting a localized economy, or as we now talk about in our Atmanirbhar Bharat, is that the locals, like in Ladakh, to a large extent are self-sustained. So they don't really, locals don't really purchase locally produced goods. So unless businesses are linked to the right market, the growth opportunities for small enterprises are very limited. The pandemic has pushed various entrepreneurs to explore other industries not dependent on tourism, but only the right access to finance, knowledge, and market will help them sustain. This reflects the need for a platform that could act as an aggregator for green tourism practices and even green tourism products to provide the right link for small enterprises across the mountain regions. We know that 95% of the private sector in the Indian Himalayan region are driven by MSMEs. And in Ladakh, for instance, the State Financial Corporation has funded over 500 registered MSMEs, out of which about 12 of the active borrowers this year have been declared as non-performing assets. And there's a fear of more enterprises falling under this bracket as the winter season sets in. This is also mainly because the financial support provided by the government have been of less benefit to the MSMEs of the mountain communities. For example, the low interest collateral free loans provided to MSMEs have the same moratorium period for the mountain states, considering the limited working season and harsh weather conditions. Another example of such an issue is that 99% of the MSMEs in Ladakh aren't registered as private limited, so they can't even avail the various benefits that the government provides, through organizations like Startup India. So the relief packages provided by the center government for MSMEs in the country need mountain-specific solutions. I'd also like to share some insights from a survey that was conducted to understand the future of tourism in Ladakh post the pandemic, and where we realized that 90% of the travelers were keen to travel post the pandemic, but would also be influenced by the government health and safety protocols set up for tourists. With an average stay duration of about a week and majority with a lower budget, most travelers said that they would prefer homestays or boutique properties with a preference over adventure or outdoor experiences. That gives them, a sense and space of isolation over bigger crowded spaces. Even TripAdvisor's recent report mentions the spike in travelers looking for nature-based experiences. Although this comes as a great opportunity to help diversify tourism experiences and ensure income distribution, the demand for a more hygienic setup also requires homestays and small businesses to be trained and prepared for the changing demands of the travelers. It is time we changed the definition of success for tourism businesses and created awareness on the need for more quality over quantity of mass tourism. Travel and tourism is also uniquely equipped and can be used as a powerful tool to be a part of the entire recovery process to shape an economy that not only grows, but grows better. The solidarity of the sector in supporting the response to the health emergency by making their infrastructure available to quarantine people or to host healthcare workers has proven the importance of coming together and working as one to fight the pandemic, and also to build a more climate resilient tourism economy that is not only sustainable, but why not regenerative? And yeah, so this is basically
Thank you, Lachik.
Thank
That
you.
was a very good exposition of how tourism has been hit in the mountains, and especially in Ladakh, and what really can what really needs to be done. But nevertheless, it seems like there is a real thread of how we can do things. So now I would like to move to the to take on some of the questions, maybe not all of them, but we have a very interesting question which I'd like to pose to both Mr. Sushil Ramola and Mr. Brij Rathore. It comes from your former colleague, Mr. Rajan Kotru. And, so the first question he mentions is a very interesting question. Do we need an extended set of sustainability parameters that sustains an established entrepreneurship, e.g. scope for diversification in time, as we have seen that smaller enterprises take off but crash very soon if not consistently supported? So Sushil, you can go first. Because this is
actually, I'm not very clear about the question. I mean, is the question from Dr. Kotru relating to can an alternative ecosystem for entrepreneurship be set up for small businesses?
I think he's talking about more of hand holding sustainability parameters. He's talking about even for an established entrepreneurship because scope for diversification, etc. He's talking.
Okay. So I think this is a challenge that we in IMI and I in my individual capacity, when we work with the youth in skilling and providing them meaningful livelihoods, we attempt to do that. This is a big question. I think what is happening really is that the government orientedness in skilling and entrepreneurship is really not of much use in addressing this question, because the entrepreneurship and the government's functioning are kind of two ends of the spectrum. Entrepreneurship really requires a different kind of forces. It faces different kind of forces. It requires different kind of a mindset, different kind of a enabling ecosystem. So I think it has to be therefore be done in a private space. So that's my first proposition, because even though there is a ministry now, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, MSDE, and they have attempted entrepreneurship development, but they have not been able to make, in my opinion, much headway in building that entrepreneurship. Whereas the entrepreneurship required is is of the mass entrepreneurship, which is even below the radar of MSMEs, as Lachik mentioned, which is, it has to be people who are self-employed, start with, and then hire 5 to 10 people. So that's where the projects like Himalaya Calling and platforms like IMI come in, because we need to create these networks. We need to create network of entrepreneurs bottom up. You know, for example, in a particular area, there is a tourism, there's a specific kind of tourism. Then we need to create a network of entrepreneurs, you know, who can come together, support each other, and synergize their efforts in terms of building scale, technology, market presence, you know, websites, etc., so that the offering can be standardized, the offering can be uniquely thing, because a huge amount of upstream work is required, which a single entrepreneur of this type may not be able to do. So these ecosystems have to be developed by private sector, and more importantly by civil society organizations like IMI, in my mind. And the enabling factor, you talked of hand holding, because that's a large part of it. Skill development is a very, very small part. But so establishing the community connections, establishing them, you know, capabilities, establishing them funding mechanisms, and creating customer networks and market networks, I think, and technology enablement are the areas where they would require hand-holding. So you could create, like in the partnership I mentioned, we need to have champions, people who are role models, who can really, who are the best people to inspire them, handhold them, and take them to the next stage. So we need to identify such champions, and if we are able to do that, we need to then create a platform where all of them can come together and create this multi-layered platform, right from the grassroots to an apex organization which can build it up. So it is a large project. It's something, but in my view, you know, I feel very strongly that it has to be created by, you know, institutions and private sector, and we need to get funding from outside the government systems for that.
Brij, would you like to supplement some of that or complement?
No, I think I'm absolutely, I think, with Sushilji on that. I think the networks, obviously, I think, provide a whole lot of support system to the individual entrepreneurs. So I think Rajan's question on what provides that support system. So one is this, the networks of entrepreneurs. Other is also, I think, which Mridula has been pointing out, the aggregators of these services. So I think that there are again opportunities, the challenge which Rajan has thrown in. So you need those aggregators using the digital platforms even to provide that kind of support system and services in particular to the entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Now, the next question I'd like to pose to Sejal, and this is again from Dr. Kotru. Is it time to regulate number of tourists in the IHR based on carrying capacity of tourism types, religious, agro, adventure, etc., site specificities, seasonality, etc., by compensating lower number of tourists with charging higher premium prices for eco-friendly, culturally conservative, and economically inclusive practices? It's a very challenging question.
Yeah, back to carrying capacity. So, you know, we go back and forth on this. So I think, you know, carrying capacity, as we've discussed earlier, is interpreted in different ways. You can increase carrying capacity by certain types of behaviors. You can decrease carrying capacity by certain types of behaviors. So I think it's not so much about carrying capacity, because those numbers can vary depending on the way you design your initiative. But I think it's more about behaviors and what we're offering. So I think it's, you know, if we, and you know, this in India, it's extremely contentious to talk about only high value tourism and to say that, you know, high value tourism should be prioritized because it has a lower footprint. We've been through all of those discussions and, you know, gone back and forth on it. There's been a big, I mean, I'll just give you an example about the kind of backlash that the issue of carrying capacity faces, again from my experiences on the ground. There are days when there is absolutely, in my town, there is absolutely no place to park a car. Okay, you cannot move because of the amount of tourism pressure. It takes about 4.5 to 5 hours to cover a 20-kilometer distance from Dehradun to Mussoorie on certain days. So on days like that, the administration has actually stepped up and said, look, there needs to be a limit on the number of cars that go up because there is no space in the town. And therefore, we will restrict cars that do not have a hotel reservation. So if you do not have a hotel reservation, we will restrict those cars from going up into the mountains because they cannot. And you cannot imagine the backlash that there was from the tourism sector. So the tourism sector, really lost it and said, how dare you stop anybody from coming? It doesn't matter if they come and have a horrible experience, but you cannot stop people from coming. There can be no limits on the number of people you send up to the mountains. So in a situation like this, where you have the tourism sector itself basically saying we do not want to talk about carrying capacity, the administration is at a loss. So I think, it requires a certain complete mindset change in terms of what are we defining as tourism in the mountains. And the whole definition of mountain tourism needs to be sort of revisited so that we don't get into a situation like this. The other option that people say is, okay, if one place is overcrowded, let's move people to more places. Now, if you're creating the same kind of pressure and the same model of tourism in more places, then you're just transferring the problem to more places. So I think basically what my sense is that rather than talking about carrying capacity and limiting numbers, because there is just not going to be an appetite for that, we need to be practical and talk about, as we develop tourism, what kind of tourism are we developing so that there is a self-limitation. I mean, we need to think about some, variables in terms of people will self-limit. Maybe it is because you're providing only a certain level of facilities, which means that will already weed out a large number of tourists who are looking for televisions and who are looking for, swimming pools and stuff like that. So I think as we develop tourism, we need to develop it in a way that will automatically limit numbers, and certain kinds of tourists who are looking for certain kinds of things will not come to those areas. So we need to think about design and planning in a smarter way, which will then create this kind of self-limiting thing rather than letting things go overboard and then saying now we're going to ban it, or now we're going to stop it, or now we're going to stop numbers, which is the way we do it now. And that creates a backlash. So it's really about reimagining and redesigning tourism in the mountains. Over.
Thank you, Sejal. The last question is to Alan Temshiji. This is, from a set of questions which has, I'm trying to kind of put it all together. And that is related to some of the, whatever you have said, is why is it that till today, from in the Northeast, it's still, we're in the 21st century and we are still grappling, and we were 2020, we're still grappling with issues like telecom and, roads and other things that are all the required infrastructure, which is so disastrous to building tourism in the Northeast. You, having been a chief secretary, might be in the best position to answer that.
Well, I mean, that will take a long discussion. So, why much underdevelopment the Northeast? One, that is because it was connected in India by a small chicken snake, call it. The rest of the country suffered by a foreign country, just further in mountainous territories and inhabited by tribal people, basically tribal people. So all these factors have led to a little slow rate of development of this basic infrastructure and amenities. But I think now the proper attention is being given by Government of India. The roads are improving, more lane roads are coming, and various national highways have spread out. And then Yeah. Can you hear me?
Can we hear you?
Yes.
No.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
we're having a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, without
Little.
okay, without the video, I think it may be.
Can you try without the video?
Okay. Yeah. So can you hear now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. So that is one of the reasons. I think I've said that the things are looking bright. The other reason has been, of course, the divisives. The insurgent.
I think Alamji has answered the question.
Yeah, I think
Hear
we'll
me
move
now?
on. Alan will move on because there is some problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, can I now request Dr. Rawal to give us a brief set of comments? Dr. Rawal, are you there?
Yeah.
Can you give us a brief set of comments? Let me introduce you because for the, we all know you very well, but, the audience may not. So, Dr. Rawal is presently the Director General, the Director of the GB Pant National Institute of Himalayan Environment and Sustainable Development, better known to us as GB Pant. We just call it GB Pant Institute. And his area of specialization is high altitude ecology and conservation biology. And he's a product of Kumaon University. So therefore, very much part of the let's put it, the Himalayan ecology mountains. He understands it so well. So Dr. Raul, your comments on much of the discussions that ensued today, as well as maybe some of the thoughts that you think we should take away from this.
Thank you very much, sir. And at the outset, let me thank the organizers for providing me this opportunity. And in fact, as it was indicated by Sejal, that after the whole lot of webinar fatigues, this is the webinar which perhaps given at least me some kind of energy to overcome all this fatigue. And also after hearing the experiences right from Nagaland to the Leh Ladakh, it was really wonderful. And I must congratulate IMI for putting entire arc of Indian Himalaya into this webinar through the representation from different sectors. And the diversity and the extent of the possibilities which was reflected by the distinguished panelists, it is really wonderful. And perhaps this is the first and foremost point wherein we need to further put our heads together as to how these possibilities will be realized on ground. This is probably the most important aspect. And as it was started with Dr. Rathore's presentation on Himalaya Calling and ended with Lachi's ground reality of Leh. So very useful insights have been provided by different panelists. And the diversity of thoughts, diversity of vision is clearly reflected. And it is very obvious also, keeping in view the diversity of a whole lot of cultural heterogeneity and biogeographical diversity across the Himalayan region. So the vision and ideas would definitely differ. but still I would put that for IMI, ICIMOD, and other organizations, even GB Pant Institute, the question still remains as to how we will take up these ideas, these visions on ground. This is one. And after having heard all the panelists, I don't think I have many new things to say. But what I had noted down through different presentations of the panelists, we have been talking about partnerships, and as it was reflected by Mridulaji, that there is a need for improving appreciation for the spaces in the Himalayan region, which are not being appreciated that much. We have been talking about community participation in the whole thinking of redesigning the tourism in the Himalayan region. Reskilling was reflected, and also it was reflected that the nature-based tourism, agriculture-based tourism need to be further improved, or that need to be mainstreamed. But I was basically thinking as to how this will happen. If I just share with your permission, sir, that the experience which I have gained over last 6 months itself, two things are happening simultaneously. One, what we are deliberating through webinars and different kind of events, be it policy dialogue, be it conversations like this. The intellectual, the policy people, the practitioners are deeply engaged with this type of deliberations, and I believe in due course of time something tangible will come out. But the another thing which is happening on ground, and I don't know about the rest of the Himalaya, but I am aware of the things happening on ground in Uttarakhand. The action on ground as adaptation response to this happening is already there. And these adaptations are from two different sectors. One, the returnees who have come back to the region. And as it was being reflected by different people, that they can be grouped in different sectors or different groups also. Some of them are not that much interested to stay back, and they might go back, and many of them have already gone back. But some of them are really interested to do something in the region itself, and some of them are right now basically they are not having the fixed idea as to how they will do. I had a journey from my place to my home town recently during Diwali, and I would just reflect that this journey of 100 kilometers, I could see that there were nearly 30 to 35 small joints, roadside restaurants or chai daba were there. And all of them were those who have come back from different cities. So the returnees who wants to stay back, they have already taken action without waiting for the support from different systems. So now as to how we will provide them the support, this is the point of discussion, or that need to be taken note of. Then as it was being reflected by Sejal, that these young returnees, they are not much interested on agriculture sector. Yes, I do agree with this. These returnees are not interested with the agriculture, but there is a response from the community who are permanent inhabitants of this region. And there are reflections, and there are evidences that these communities have started going back to the abandoned lands. This is very clear. So this response is from the community sides. Again, no support has gone to them from different sectors. So we will have to take their responses into our whatever thinking, whatever deliberations we are having. Then the another example I would cite, again, a journey to a small place called Jakholi. I was recently there in a Jakholi block of Rudraprayag district. And it was by chance I reached there. And as it was being reflected that the small places which have value for tourism, they are not being appreciated by people. I could just say this Jakholi is a place where I reached in the evening, and it has the energy to retain me and my team there for one additional day. But unfortunately, this place, which is just 35 kilometers away from main route to the Kedarnath, wherein you find the mass pilgrimage, and a whole lot of people are going there. This Jakholi rest house, or the KMBN guest house, was empty for last 7 months. Ours was the first team who was there for that evening and stayed back for one more day because that place had that energy. And while discussing with people and while having my event there, I came across a lady who is having control over 600 SHGs, self-help groups of 6 districts in that particular area. She has a control over 1,200 women farmers of that particular area. So I was thinking, while we are thinking of the collaborations and partnerships, we can bring such networks which are already available on ground and who have the understanding of community, who have the understanding of agriculture, who have the understanding of nature. If we can bring such networks in our rethinking or redesigning process, I believe that can make a dent and that can make an impact. This is what I wanted to share. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rahul. That was indeed a very, very interesting take from your personal experience, and you've ended with how you can connect it to what Sejal had already said about how we can build these networks at the local level. So now, can we request our final speaker, Dr. Eklavya Sharma, who is the Director General of ICIMOD, to share his thoughts, today, after listening to all the speakers before him, and including Dr. Rahul, and trying to contextualize it with the whole task of Himalaya Calling, and indeed in the area of partnerships.
Thank you.
Dr. Eklavya Sharma, let me introduce you. He's the Deputy Director General of ICIMOD, and his role is to support and provide direction to programs in overall operation and management of ICIMOD in line with the policies and strategies approved by the Board of Governors. Apart from this, I'm happy to inform you that Eklavya ji has been a constant source of inspiration to IMI and to the mountain people in general. He has spent considerable time of his early formative years in establishing the office of GB Pant in Sikkim. Over to you.
Thank you very much for a very nice introduction, my friend, old friend, PDG. First of all, the sessions which we had, 2 sessions on mountain conversations, reimagining a post-COVID-19 Himalayan future. And the first one was really exciting in terms of looking into solutions which are nature-based, and looked into all the possibilities, what are the collaborations. And today, we very much looked into policy and some of the ground realities, looking into one topic, which is on tourism very much. So it was really exciting. I don't know whether others have realized or not. I think I would like to mention here one very important transition. We had a first session in September when Mr. Sushil Ramola ji was the president of IMI. And now we are having the second session in span of about 1.5 months, and we have a new president, Mr. P.D. Wright. So I would like to congratulate the outgoing president for wonderful tenure, and I would like to wish a very bright future for the new president of IMI. And I have to tell, IMI is really doing a wonderful job to integrate and to bring the civil society perspective across the Indian Himalayan region, and connecting with through ICIMOD and with outside the Indian Himalayan region, in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, as well as outside. Today's session was really, really engrossing. So I also didn't have the fatigue, although I have to attend almost every day webinar somehow or the other, even the meetings. But I think I am right through from the beginning. So for me, I think I very strongly feel that the first session and now the second session, it has linked very, very well. And in the first session, we talked about vision in terms of what are the major livelihood issues in terms of returnees, in terms of tourism, in terms of other ecosystem impacts. We looked into all different dimensions like social aspects. We looked into the gender-related issues. We looked into food and nutrition security issues. All these, we looked into that very much. And some of very good examples from the Indian context came in the discussion. And today we are relating it to a very action-oriented future. So, and in order to become action-oriented, we moved from very broad thinking to a very focused tourism-related topic, which is, I think, core across the Himalayan arc in the Indian Himalayan region, also outside. So, in my opinion, I think it is moving towards the right direction. And the Himalaya Calling, which Mr. Rathore explained, the core of the thematic thinking for Himalayan Calling is also tourism, which he mentioned very clearly, and then talked about all other related issues. Very much, I think the systems approach, support is quite important. So Alamsi Jamir and our colleague from NERCOM, they talked about connectivity. They talked about the IT connectivity, road connectivity, and how we want to be really connected with outside if we want to really do something on tourism. Without that, it is not possible. So that was also excellent in my opinion. And Saijal, of course, was giving a very good example of how the individuals can make a difference. And I think it has to fit in the broader perspective of conservation and development, both moving together, which is the biggest challenge in the current world. We think only of economic development and don't care of the environmental sustainability. So for IMI, for ICIMOD, for GB Pant Institute, for all the people who are here, I think the challenge for all of us is how we are going to balance this development which is going to happen, and that development is required in the mountains, but not at the cost of conservation, not at the cost of the environment degradation. So very much then comes Mridula. I mean, she talked about the destination level sustainability. And in that, she talked a little bit about the ecological or environmental sustainability, social and cultural sustainability. And also, in my opinion, she didn't put directly under this destination level sustainability. The most important is local economic development. I think that is also quite critical and important. So looking into the future, I think there is going to be an action. And there is going to be a very important action, that is Himalaya Calling, which is going, the project is already there and we want to really move forward. And in this, of course, COVID is a disruption. But our bigger plan of climate adaptation, our bigger plan of sustainable mountain development should be our approach. And in that, how this disruption has created a problem and how we address that disruption together with our bigger vision, which we have started the journey. For that, I want to give you one example of Sikkim. Mr. P.D. Rai mentioned my past work and GB Pant Institute. It's a very important example. The topic very much relevant here. And what happened after 25 years, that also I would like to mention and as an example, because today is an example day. Everybody talked about their example. So let me talk very small. So it was 1990 when we were thinking of tourism work. So the number of visitors coming to Sikkim was only 95,000. So in 1995, we were perceiving and writing a program which is Sikkim Biodiversity and Ecotourism. For the first time, bringing ecotourism concept and thinking, and Sikkim was opening. And that year, 1995, the amount of visitors had grown because Sikkim was opening up. It was 1,57,000. And you know, just before the pandemic, it must be 10 times more visitors going to Sikkim. So suddenly this, I mean, bigger vision, we need to see where we were, where we want to go, and what are the things that we need to really invest in terms of service, in terms of all this destination level sustainability. So ultimate aim is to have sustainability at the destination level. So at that time, we were trying to prove a hypothesis, which was enterprise-based, community-involved conservation. It was a global hypothesis being tested in 20 different nations, and we were selected in Sikkim by USAID to test this hypothesis. And the entrepreneurship here was the ecotourism for us. And the irony, see, we were supposed to select the pilot site to do this. So we went first to Lachen and Lachung. And then we also went to Yaksam. So looking into those two sites is very, very important and critical. See, Lachen and Lachung was restricted at that time. So for us, community and conservation was excellent. Their yak, then medicinal plants, it was excellent in Lachen and Lachung. But there were very little entrepreneurship development in 1995 in Lachung, very much. So somehow in the hypothesis which we are trying to test, the one very important of sustainability, economic sustainability, linking with conservation and local community was missing. So we didn't select that pilot site. Then we thought we should move to another site, and that was Yaksam. So Yaksam had a lot of potential, but still Yaksam was not as exciting as was Lachung. But we decided to select Yaksam. And Yaksam, Khichipiri, Jongri corridor was selected. And very much here, today Mridula talked about the destination level sustainability. We thought of destination level sustainability because the hypothesis itself talks about community, it talks about conservation, it talks about the local entrepreneurship development. And in this, the institution is so important. If I have to see, and the whole this project, which we actually implemented for 3 years, I went in 2018 with the Norwegian ambassador and my director general here to both the destinations, Lachung and Yaksam. My observation of Lachung was what Lachung was, and it was totally no culture. The food was served by people, community prepared from outside. And there was very little culture. Even the rooms, buildings, all those were changing so fast. So it didn't really capture the concept and hypothesis which we moved out of that, because it was opened and whole thing changed just for economic development, and it was not directed, not designed and moved forward. But on the other hand, we created an institution called Kanchenjunga Conservation Committee. And many of you know the stories of KCC. It's already now 25 years and KCC is going good and better and better and better. So that means the sustainability lies with the institution, and if the institution has capacity, if the institution can network, and if the institution can give these benefits at the local level, I think that is the way forward. And I very strongly feel, I was just sitting, this example just came out while I was listening to all the others. So exactly, if you look at, if we want to have a development, I think then the destination in terms of tourism. And here, one thing is very important, whether you could pick up from my, see the context and contextual factors in a given time when we are going to have implementation on the ground matter so much. The context and the contextual factors of Lachung was quite different than the context and contextual factor of Yoksam, Kichipiri and Chongri. So I'm just trying to say, tell you that when we talk broadly across the Indian Himalayan region, and within Sikkim also, we see the vast difference in the context and what is relevant. So in my closing remarks, I would like to say that we have to have a big vision. We have to have a thinking which is conceptually clear, which has to go forward. But I think ultimately this big vision of the Indian Himalayan region has to be grounded in different places across the Indian Himalayan states. And those grounding has to be in such a way that I think we need to look for local sustainability. And in that, the local institutions are going to be very critical and important. And we bind these local examples and then make a success story across the region, and then try to think of the Indian Himalayan region's contribution on tourism. So I think I have spoken more than I am allocated. I can go on talking, but I found the whole entire discussion was excellent. And I very much wanted to tell that when we are disrupted by COVID, let's think of COVID, but let's not forget about our bigger sustainability goals of the mountain Indian Himalayan region. And in that, conservation and development, the link, the balance is quite critical and important. Everybody talked about that. And we are convinced for conservation, but many development, the infrastructure development, all these people are not convinced about conservation. The challenge for IMI, challenge for ICIMOD, challenge for WWF, challenge for GB Panthi Institute is how to convert the non-convert people who don't appreciate conservation, who don't appreciate the ecosystem services and the cultural services of the mountains. So I think that is the challenge. And in our programming, in our Himalayan calling, I think that is the type of support system which if we are able to provide in terms of knowledge, in terms of this, and try to develop these pilot sites. So let's take these 5-6 pilot sites across and think of this context, the contextual factors, and try to see how ecotourism or tourism can be built. I think that's all I would like to say. But finally, I would like to thank IMI for this excellent 2 sessions. I am really, really excited that Himalaya Calling will soon take off, and where GB Panthi Institute, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, partners like IMI and other partners and ICIMOD, we would like to make a difference on the ground. And we would like to suddenly see the Indian Himalayan region will have good actions on the ground in a, by involvement of all stakeholders in a very good partnership mode. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Eklavya-ji. You forgot to mention that there was another institution that you and I founded, which is called ECOS.
Yes, sorry. I didn't go to the ECOS site, so maybe because of that I forgot. But I think
no, because that was a direct outcome, in fact, of the Sikkim Biodiversity Project. And it continues to do some excellent work. So now with that, we come to an end. I would not like to add any more, even though it is suggested that there be some remarks. However, I would so I would like to close this session, but before that, can all our panelists please put on their cameras, because I think our secretariat wants to take a photograph. Yeah, we'll miss Mridula, but we'll probably have to, yeah. Brij? I think Brij is, yeah. Brij. Has Mihin Dolo left? Brij? Can't see.
Yeah, I'm here, and I don't know, my camera is.
It's come.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So, Roland, can you do the needful?
We took it, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the panelists, Alanji, Tejal, Dr. Rawal, Eklavya Sharma ji, Sushil Ramola ji, Lachek, Brij, also those who have left, Mridula and Mihin, for an excellent session. I really enjoyed the session. Even as a moderator, I was thoroughly impressed with whatever has been spoken. At this, I'd also like to thank all the audience participation that has been there on Facebook, on YouTube, and as well as on this particular platform. I'd also like to thank our young friends from the Secretariat who have ably managed both these webinars, the conversations that we've had. And I'm sure that ICIMOD and IMI and of course the other institutions like GB Pant and WWF will continue to have these kinds of conversations, because we also need to inspire each other, even though we have to convert the non-converted. And in that, I'd just like to thank Sejal for saying that let's talk to the mass market as well. And that's where I think we'll have to drill some sense into people. Thank you very much for a very engaging session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.